This is the third and final part of the lab. I want you to experiment with the Segwencer. You can just go nuts and patch all the stuff and then make audio captures. Or you can just look at the still screenshots that I made of some ideas. Or you can follow along with this. And look, I'm making this up as I go. I'm not even in the lab. I'm just looking at a screen. So let's think about this for a minute. The first thing that I would suggest is that you remember what I am planning on showing you in the lab, which is the behavior of the Segwencer, meaning the behavior of how it behaves with an incoming control voltage and how much that behavior changes based upon the settings of the knobs. Meaning that when I first got this module, I wasn't real patient and I kind of didn't like it. I didn't use it a whole lot. And then I sat down a little while later and I was patient and I figured out that this is the kind of module, in my opinion, that I don't tend to modulate and change a lot during a patch. I tend to dial it in so it does a certain thing and then I leave it alone. Whereas maybe a filter, you change all the time and other things as well. So that's just something to bear in mind. So now let's make up some patches. Segwencer patch idea one of who knows how many you could make. Really simple, really easy, and it's why I also brought in the quad LFO. The quad LFO, these little light, they come on to indicate the speed, and they're also switches. So in one position it's in slow mode, and in another position it's fast. So remember that. Also you have sine and square wave that you can select. Since you got 4, and you have 4 Segwencer inputs, I won't keep doing this, but take all 4 of these output jacks and run them into inputs 1 through 4 of this. And then I would set them, at slightly different speeds, probably not too slow for what I'm going to show you first. So, a sine wave going something like that, and definitely a square wave as well. Then take the output, mix total output. Let's say that you're using this VCO as an audio VCO, and you just take the triangle wave direct into the VCA. So you can hear this. It's going, it's just droning. Take the audio output, the main output of the Segwencer, into the linear frequency. This is like a vibrato input, and turn this knob up about halfway. Now, as different signals, LFOs 1 through 4, come into here, you'll hear them mix together and have quite an effect on this. Especially if you set, say, a relatively fast sine, a somewhat, relatively fast square. Don't try to match them exactly. And then a noticeably slower sine and a noticeably slower square. And you mix them together in and out with this Segwencer, you'll hear quite an effect. So there's an idea. And when you do it, make sure to capture it in Logic. Okay, here's idea number 2. Let's take our noise output, plug it into our fixed filter bank. And I will do 1, but do 4. Pick 4 of the individual outs, each one into an input of the Segwencer 1 through 4. And then just take the mix out into your VCA. Now bear in mind, right? I'm assuming you guys know this. You would have 4 cables coming down here, 4 different frequencies. And then control this not only with like the mod wheel, this way, so you're manually controlling it. This is something that's really cool to use either an envelope generator or an LFO. So I would take an LFO where you can quickly switch the waveforms and the intensity and bring it down here. Low mode, not too fast, somewhere in the middle, like 1 o'clock on the clock dial. And remember, this is going to have a lot of different effects depending on this setting right here and these 2 on the Segwencer. So there's idea number 2. Here's idea number 3. Take a row of this sequencer, plug it into the quantizer, if you choose to, unless you like microtonality. You pick any row. I pick row 3 because it's closest to the bottom and I'm lazy. And, set the frequency vernier in maybe 3 or 4 and the speed somewhere so it's not too slow or too fast for you. And then bring the pitch output down to a mult because you're going to use 2, at least 2. Now, come out into VCO3 and also feed the same pitch to VCO4. tune them. Now set them either in like an octave apart. What's important is that they're not tuned in unison. So set them to a perfect fifth apart, or an octave apart, or a minor third or something. Then set your pulse width. Let me go get a little thing here, knob marker. Set your pulse width somewhat narrow, experiment with it, okay? Then take a sawtooth or ramp out from this one into input 1. Then take a sawtooth from the differently tuned oscillator into 2. Then take the pulse wave, or you could use this, so you could change waveforms randomly, and then do the same thing with this. Now, in effect, you're doing something that was in the reading, sort of. You're doing wave table oscillation to a degree. So now it's going to bounce back and forth when you modulate the Segwencer between whatever the frequencies are between them, and then to different timbres, different harmonic content. If you're using a pulse wave and you also take an output from a sine wave LFO into the pulse width control and turn the pulse width up a little bit for each one, it'll really start coming alive because you'll have pulse width modulation on the sounds. So that's a pretty cool sound. Then you hit this and it's playing. Now it may get confusing because of the fact that these are tuned differently, which is why I started off saying an octave. If you tune them in an octave, whatever note you set that to, if you set it to a G sharp, you'll be hearing a G sharp. But a perfect fifth is also pretty interesting, and subdominant, a perfect fourth down. So there's another idea. This is the final idea that I'm going to show you. It's the most complex one, but it's progressively more fun. You're going to start off the same way you did before. Start off with the sequencer, and if you want, you can come here and do an 8-stage sequence, or if you want, you can do this. And then take the output here into the quantizer, take your gate 1 output into the shift. Now it'll shift back and forth and you'll get a 16-stage sequence. Suit yourself. Then take the output like you did before, mult it. Let's feed a couple oscillators because 2 sound better usually than 1. Now what you're going to do is take a waveform output of your choice into a mult, and then feed that to 3 different filters. And I'm choosing these because they're both state variables. So if I did this, this is a low pass, I might set this to a band pass and this to a high pass. You're getting the picture, right? So here, this is the audio output, and we'll come into Segwencer. I think 1 is the bottom, and this one we'll use a band pass output in here, and then this one we'll use a high pass. Now, if you wanted to, if you turn this connect switch and push it up, these 4 are merged with these, so it's now a single 8-way mult. If you did that, you could also feed the audio in to this filter, which is right here. And then you do the same thing. You ready for this? With your second one. Or let's say you wanted to actually use all 4 filters. I would come down, come on, gosh darn it. I would come down to this guy, and we'll go here, and the filter has 2 inputs. And we'll go here, and this filter has 2 inputs. We'll go here, this filter has 2 inputs, and click this switch up, and then come down here. This filter has 2 inputs, and then this is the output, which would go into Segwencer 4. Getting the picture? Now, here's the thing about this patch. This is not going to do much until you start modulating each filter. So one of the things you could do is you could take the control out or this gate out, mult it, feed it into envelope generators. So here's one envelope generator. Let's bring that right into this filter right here. This filter, the bottom jack has an intensity or attenuator control here. The other two are also modulation inputs, but they're unattenuated. Then as it fires gates, set this a certain way. Now, if you did this or this, it's going to fire at the speed of your sequence. So you would, it's not going to be a long evolving kind of a sound. So just bear that in mind, that if instead you took, let's say, the gate output for stage 7 alone and had it fire, I don't know, different envelope generator, or reset the sync on an LFO, that would be cool. When this fires into the sync input, it causes this to reset its cycle at 0. So set it fairly slow, and then take the triangle out or square wave and bring it into the modulation input of the filter. So the idea is that you got 3 or 4 filters. Each one's getting different modulation, different envelope generator and or LFO. Each one's going to the Segwencer, and then which one you're hearing is dependent on your modulation, which could be your mod wheel or anything else. Remember to capture the audio.